As well, so I know you guys will be really tired. We're going to try and keep it relatively simple and get through it. So today we're going to be talking about psilocybin-induced mystical type experiences, and the talk's going to be split into two parts. We have a quantitative half. Everything okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. We have a quantitative half where we're talking about numbers, and we have a qualitative half as well, expanding into these qualitative research. Couldn't have asked for a better introduction from the previous talk. This research is performed at the Neurobiology Research Unit, which is part of the University of Copenhagen, which is part of Rigshospitalet, the hospital in Copenhagen. And actually, this paper is now being published in Frontiers in Pharmacology. So yeah, if you just Google like Grzywacz, McCulloch, mystical, quantitative, it'll come up, I'm sure. Okay. So in this study, we performed a secondary analysis on 35 psilocybin sessions that we performed between 2017 and 2020 in healthy volunteers. And we gave them about 20 milligrams of psilocybin. It's like 3.5 grams of mushrooms. I've had to clarify that for quite a lot of people. It's a medium to high dose. And we were first and foremost interested in investigating the relation between the acute mystical type experience, which we measured 8 hours after psilocybin administration, so when they're sober again, and the relation between that and the persisting positive effects on people's lives 3 months after the administration of psilocybin. We hypothesized that the mystical type experience would be related to these persisting positive effects, but more specifically that the subcomponents of this mystical type experience, known as mysticality, it's very vague, and positive mood would be, and the other components wouldn't. We'll get to that. And then we noticed, looking through the literature, that there's actually no qualitative descriptions of the orally administered psilocybin experience in healthy volunteers available in any published literature within the new age of psychedelics. So we wanted to provide this to assist future research and people who are getting into the space to have these qualitative descriptions of these experiences. But we wanted to try and unbias our qualitative findings using text mining and natural language processing. And we hypothesized that some of the themes that we would uncover would reflect the mystical experience, but then some other themes would not be captured by the MEQ. So how do we define a mystical type experience? It sounds very nebulous, but we use this questionnaire, the Mystical Experiences Questionnaire, aptly named, which is 30 items. It's self-report that people fill out on the evening of the experience. And it has 4 subscales. First one is mysticality, experience of pure being and pure awareness beyond the world of sense impressions. Positive mood, quite simplistically, feelings of joy. Transcendence of time and space, this sort of sense of being outside of time, beyond past and future. And then ineffability, this feeling that you just can't describe the experience using words. And then we use this distinction of a complete mystical experience that's come up in the literature before, which is that if someone scores more than 60% on all 4 of these subscales, they're characterized as having a complete mystical experience. If one person scores like 100% on 3 of them, and then 59 on one of them, we're like, sorry, buddy, not a complete mystical experience. Get over there with the rest of them. So how we measure the persisting positive effects is with this questionnaire called the PEQ, Persisting Effects Questionnaire, super imaginative. This is a self-report questionnaire as well, filled out 3 months after the administration. And it specifically asks about what changes do you feel have happened in your life that are due to your experience with psilocybin or your reflection upon that experience, and asks specifically about the one experience that they had in our lab. It has 6 subscales: attitudes about life, attitudes about yourself, changes in behavior, changes in mood, changes in your relationships, and changes in spirituality. And then there's several questions within each subscale, of course, and they're presented pairwise. So you have more trust that everything in life will work out all right, and you have less trust that everything in life will work out all right. So in terms of data collection, we had 12 females and 16 males. You might note that doesn't add up to 35. It's because 7 of them got psilocybin on 2 different occasions, several years apart. 4 of these sessions were performed in a PET scanner. 10 of them were in a dedicated, comfortable room. This is the room that Maria actually designed for us at the NRU. And 21 sessions were performed in an MR scanner. They got scanned multiple times during their session. We collected the MEQ and then mandalas, which are effectively a drawing in a circle with colored pencils on the dosing day after they'd sort of come down. And then in the evening, before they went to sleep, we sent them an online form and asked them to fill out just a free text report explaining their experience in as much detail as possible. And they were allowed to just write and write and write. And some people really did, provided pages and pages of descriptions of their experience. The irony of ineffability is not lost. We then collected the PEQ just by sending them an online questionnaire 3 months later. This is a scary-looking statistical model that we use to investigate the relation between each of the subscales of the MEQ with the persisting positive drug effects. I should note at this point, we barely saw any persisting negative drug effects. Although I was really interested in looking into those, there simply wasn't enough data there for us to look at it. So we grouped together, this thing's called a latent variable, we grouped together all of the positive subscales of the PEQ, and then saw how each of the subscales of the MEQ was related to that latent variable that was the PEQ. We then performed a mediation analysis with all these covariates, sex, dose, age, and which project they were in, like the scanning environment or not, to see whether there was direct effects on persisting positive drug effects or indirect effects through the MEQ. I can go into that, that's not in the slides, it's in the bonus slides. So the results of this were, first and foremost, that we replicated what we've seen in Hopkins and other groups, where the total MEQ score, when you just aggregate the whole thing, was really closely related and robustly related to these persisting positive drug effects. The y-axis here is just the different subscales, and the x-axis is how well it was related to the persisting positive drug effects. Positive mood and mysticality were also robustly associated with persisting positive drug effects. But then transcendence of time and space and ineffability, although sort of on balance generally positively associated, the variance and the uncertainty associated with those subscales with the PPELV were much lower. So much so that positive mood and mysticality, like super significant if p-values are your thing, and transcendence of time and space and ineffability, like super not significant if p-values are your thing. But I like confidence intervals much better. I think they tell the story. So that's the quantitative half of the story. On the qualitative half, we took these free text reports that people collected on the night, and we lemmatized down all the words. And what that just means is taking the word down to its root so that you can count words more effectively. We then split by whether they had a complete mystical experience or did not have a complete mystical experience, and formed these two bodies of text. We then did a word counting, it's TF, IDF, term frequency, inverse document frequency analysis. Sounds fancy, pretty much we just count how many times each word appeared, and then whether it appeared in both corpi of texts or only appeared in one. If it appeared in both, we threw it out. If it only appeared in one, we kept it. Now I'm going to hand over to Maria while she explains the results. If everyone wants to take pictures of these cool midnight gospel gifts, that's fine. Okay, I'll hand it over to Maria.
Thank you. So on to the results part. From the natural language processing, as Drummond mentioned, we were able to kind of distinguish and select some of the words that came up most frequently across the complete mystical experience free text reports. So the first word, or the word that came up most frequently, was universe. The second most frequent was dad. This is a picture of our fathers. Magnetic resonance, remember that one? That's going to come up in some of the upcoming slides as well. Beauty, or beautiful, and simultaneous. So what we did afterwards, after we kind of, the TF-IDF analysis spat out these words on us, we also manually went through the free text reports to ensure that one individual, one participant, wasn't just driving and kind of the frequency of the word. So that one person didn't mention the same word hundreds of times, which would make it the most frequently appearing word. And what we then did was to go through some of the quotes and see in which quotes the most frequently used words would appear. So as I mentioned, the MR scanner, in this quote we hear that I felt a sense of no longer being connected to my own body. The MRI scanner and I stepped into a different reality together with colors and shapes and figures. What we did afterwards was to compare whether these quotes were somehow aligned with the items of the MEQ. And in this case, we have the MEQ item number 6, which speaks of experience of oneness or unity with objects and or persons perceived in your surroundings. And that item is under the subscale of mysticality. The final point of our qualitative analysis was to go through the mandalas, as Drummond mentioned, essentially colorful drawings in a circle. They come from Jungian tradition and are perceived as expression of self. So then we saw or checked whether the participant has drawn a mandala and whether that mandala was somehow connected to their free text report. and to some of the results and quotes from our participants. As you remember, universe was the most frequently appearing word across the reports from people who had a complete mystical experience. And here a male participant says, "Several times during the trip, I found myself laughing in sheer admiration of the impressive and wondrous universe of human consciousness." And we then checked which MEQ item that quote would be related to. And MEQ item number 27, sense of awe or awesomeness, expresses that really nicely, and that's from the subscale of positive mood. The second most frequent word was dad, and here the quote says, "I had a feeling that I was experiencing the world through myself as a little girl holding her dad's hand. My dad and I were observing what was happening around us. I think we saw something that resembled beautiful nature and charming castles." As you can see at the drawing, this female participant is walking there with her father. And an important thing to note is that no themes around family or interpersonal relationships are actually addressed in the MEQ, which I'll also talk about later. Beauty was also one of the words that came out pretty frequently across the reports. And here the participant says, "My inner vision became the universe, filled with colorful waterfalls, glistening like stars, not bound by gravity. They floated in the air and folded around each other, totally quiet. The streams were infinite and beautiful." And here, interestingly, it relates to MEQ item number 2, experience of amazement from the subscale of positive mood. But also, it's important to note that the MEQ doesn't really address any visual alterations or pseudo-hallucinations. So now for actual implications for the persisting positive effects. What Drummond mentioned with our hypothesis, we actually found a subscale-specific effect. So where the subscales of positive mood and mysticality were more closely correlated with persisting positive effects. Important to mention is also the fact that we didn't find or note any relation between peak plasma psilocin levels and the MEQ or PEQ scores, which you can see here in the graph with a p-value of 0.88. So that kind of poses the question or shows us that the mystical state, the mystical experience might be more due to individual differences rather than pharmacological drug effects. And this is where it makes great sense to actually administer questionnaires, for example, about absorption or baseline spirituality, which we will do for our upcoming studies. Important to note is also the fact that we didn't note any negative reaction in the MR environment. Quite the contrary, as you could hear before, participants felt at one with the MR scanner. And this leads us to maybe a wider discussion of how to most optimally facilitate the psychedelic experience and support the experience of positive mood and mysticality. So help our participants to lean into the good times, which was also one of the titles for the paper that we considered at one point.
I prefer effing the ineffable, but yeah.
So, as we mentioned, non-MEQ related themes also emerged in the free text reports. First of them was family love, and this happy family is myself, my grandma, and the mermaid in Copenhagen. Gratitude, and feeling of experiencing two things at the same time. It's also worth noting that we didn't find any, or the free text reports didn't really describe any challenging experiences or distressing events, probably or maybe because the study was performed on healthy individuals, so we cannot know if this would also be the case for patient groups. And last but not least, it's important to know that we didn't find common themes for non-complete mystical experiences. So the descriptive variability in the free text reports gathered from individuals who didn't have a complete mystical experience was much wider. We also performed a TF-IDF analysis on the non-mystical experience reports, and the word that came up most time was gloomy. That didn't really refer to a particular experience, but rather to the music that was played for the participants. Some of the other words that came up as second and third most frequent were, however, driven by a single individual putting the same word many times in one report. So sadly, we can't show you a representative graph of words for non-mystical or non-complete mystical experiences. And I will now hand over to Drummond again.
Thanks, Maria. So one of the curious things about our sample of all 35 of those experiences were rated as greater than 60% ineffable, as you can see from the top right-hand quadrant of this section of graphs here. And that ineffability was not associated with these persisting positive effects. So some consider in the space that ineffability is a core component of mystical experiences, i.e. if you can describe the experience you had with words, then it wasn't really a mystical experience. But then within phenomenology, our friend Thomas Nagel, as a bat up in that top left corner, believes that all phenomena are fundamentally ineffable. And so what's special about the mystical experience if everything's ineffable anyway? So some then consider effability just to be the product of shared experience. And we can all talk about, yeah, we know what a chair is because I've seen a chair, you've seen a chair, everyone's seen a chair. So when I use the word chair, we're all talking about the same thing. However, so few people have maybe experienced these peak psilocybin-induced experiences that we just don't have the language yet. We haven't developed effability about those concepts because simply too few people have experienced and discussed it. But we're actually well along the way there. And these terms, I think it came up earlier, these terms like oceanic boundlessness and ego dissolution, we kind of know what those mean now, even though 10 years ago we wouldn't have had a clue. And it's just because they come up in the scientific literature, and there's phenomenology research that's trying to characterize these sort of concepts. It's very much worth addressing that we're hardcore, rigorous neuroimaging scientists, and yet we're up here talking about mysticism. You know, no offense, right, Mika. And there's an overwhelming sort of pressure building that mysticism is a problem for psychedelic science. And there's this article, Moving Past Mysticism in Psychedelic Science, where they argue that the more we administer the MEQ and publish papers that say the mystical experience, it's just going to become this self-fulfilling prophecy, where when you ask people now, what was your experience? They're like, oh, they're going to be like, yeah, it was all mystical and spiritual, because that's the language that we're feeding to them. And then they're no longer going to be able to describe their experience in other phenomenological terms. So it limits, it pigeonholes people into conceiving of their experience in that way. Another serious concern is that if patients are coming into studies and then having existential, metaphysical revelations about the existence of an afterlife or connectedness of all things, and then as a result of that, recovering from their psychiatric conditions, is that something that we want? That seems like a bit of an ethical conundrum if we don't believe those things to necessarily be veridical. However, we ask our participants, and I mean, these are Danish, very secular people, we ask them these questions, you know, do you feel you had a certainty of encounter with ultimate reality? Do you feel you had a sense of being at a spiritual height? And they're like, yeah, 5 out of 5, that's what I experienced, right? And so, and some people don't, and if you gave them, you know, cocaine, they don't. So what we do is, well, they might, I guess. What we're collecting here is a cluster of co-occurring experiences without necessarily attributing any sort of supernatural or spiritual concept to them. There's still a cluster of experiences in experience space, right? And so that makes them useful for developing a better phenomenology. And that's why we've tried to use the MEQ to build our phenomenological quantification or qualification of the psilocybin experience. And that's kind of the purpose of this paper. So limitations. Everyone says this, bigger sample sizes, more research needs to be done. But I'm aware that almost every group that does psychedelic clinical research collects both the MEQ and the PEQ. So if you guys want to send me your data, like I can just chuck it through my pipeline and we can see whether this subscale effect maintains, or whether it's just a Danish thing, or whether it's just a small sample thing. We're already collabing with Hopkins on this, so I'm hoping that we can just pool all of the MEQs and PEQs and see whether this replicates across the world. So please be in touch. Find me on Twitter, I guess. I forgot to put my email on here. One of the important things about this is that the PEQ and the MEQ, they were developed by Johns Hopkins. And for some reason, their scores in the PEQ, in their placebo groups, are higher than ours in our high-dose groups. And ours are pretty much the same as in Basel. So there's something going on at Hopkins where people are walking in the door, getting the nothing pill, and walking out 3 months later like, oh my God, my life is so much better. Right? And then at high doses, it's even higher. And the same goes with the MEQ. At placebo, 6% of their participants had a complete mystical experience. And then at 5 milligrams, 35% had a complete mystical experience. I mean, that's really, really high. So there's something dodgy going on between the groups. I think Hopkins are a great group, by the way. This is not a slander thing. Like, they're awesome. We're working with them. But there's international differences, and we have to work out what those are and why those are. Maybe, like, our translation sucks. Who knows? This was just brought up as well, but I just have to echo it again. Expectancy and the number of conferences and books and podcasts and all of the hype is really going to be driving people only upwards in terms of their acute experiences and in terms of their persisting effects. So we have to, controlling it is very difficult, and active placebos are a great idea, but they don't, I just haven't seen it pan out. I just don't think you can blind people here. But what you can do is you can measure expectancy, both about the acute effects and the persisting effects, and then covary for it in your models. And that'll help us to get closer to some ground truth here. We also missed a trick. We didn't forget. We simply didn't ask for qualitative descriptions of the persisting positive effects at 3 months. That would have been great. That would have given us a lot of background. And so in our next study, which is a larger sample, we are collecting those things. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I urge other people who are looking at persisting effects of these drugs to ask for qualitative descriptions of long-term follow-up. Finally, we don't really know what happened in those 3 months. We don't know if people took psilocybin again. We don't know if people got married, one of their parents died. So without knowing that, it's hard to draw any sort of distinct causal link between the MEQ and the PEQ. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I'd like to thank everyone who made this research possible. Thank the Mind Foundation for inviting us. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, guys. Really interesting presentation, also great addition to what Michiel talked about. We are quite short on time, but I would like to allow one question from the audience, since mystical experiences are always a very hot topic.
Actually, I have a question.
Perfect.
Please.
So it's regarding the way we define, and you defined the mystical experience in itself. I saw that you referred to it as being beyond the senses, ineffable, and even the results from your studies were kind of using these descriptions of meeting the universe, or even mystical experience regarding the family, or something out there which is not here in my perception. So I'm wondering, what if we reconsidered what we consider a mystical experience? Like, what if the senses can lead to a mystical experience? What if we don't need to go out there or meet God or travel through the universe to have a mystical experience? That's...
Yeah, it's a great point. And this really comes down to how one defines the mystical experience. Some people might say, if you're not traveling and you're not meeting God, that's not a mystical experience. You just had a really good time. And maybe that's okay. You know, it doesn't need to be mystical for it to be powerful and emotional and meaningful. It doesn't necessarily have to be mystical. Whatever makes something mystical is perhaps the fact that it starts to go beyond us. And that's very much a personal hot take on the topic, but I might defer to other mysticality experts that might be proximal.
But I also think it's worth mentioning that a mystical experience is not necessarily drug-induced, right? So, I mean, these scales are also used on religious experiences, for example. So I think kind of like bringing a mystical experience down would not only affect psychedelic science, but also other contexts in which mystical experiences have been described before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I do consider that mystical experiences in going beyond ourselves are amazing and extremely valuable, but I also consider that going inside ourselves, it's equally valuable and equally mystical. Mm. So, yeah.
Guess we'll agree to disagree.
Thank you.
That was our one question.
Yeah, only one.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.